You're asking who I am to summon 8 warships with a single signal. Amid the misty expanse of the ocean, an old man with silver hair sat bound on the deck of a rotting vessel. His eyes betrayed no fear. Instead, they seemed to converse with ghosts of the past. On the ship's deck, a wooden box, silent for 51 years, suddenly emitted an eerie sound. While the Coast Guard argued among themselves, the Navy was approaching, not to arrest him, but to bow. What secrets lay within that box? And why was his silence worth an entire fleet? All right, my dear audience, get ready for a story that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to like the video, subscribe, and drop a comment below telling me where and what time you're watching from. It's always thrilling to see viewers joining us from all around the world. The early morning sea lay draped in a thick, cold mist, as silent as if the entire ocean were holding its breath. Gliding quietly through that scene was a small vessel named Silent Tide, weathered and time-worn. Peeling paint revealed layers of rotten wood beneath, yet its helm had been meticulously polished, gleaming oddly in the haze. Not a sound, not a movement, except for the gentle waves lifting the hull as though soothing someone who had long since ceased struggling. On deck sat an elderly man, motionless. John Jack Carter, 80 years old, had his hands bound behind his back with coarse rope. The wind whipped his silver hair, and the thin wool sweater he wore flapped with each cold gust. Yet he neither trembled nor resisted. He sat upright, eyes fixed on the misty horizon, where the first light of day had not yet pierced the fog. A U.S. Coast Guard patrol boat drew alongside. Its engine hummed softly. A rotating amber spotlight swept over Silent Tide's hull, illuminating the lone figure on deck. Officers swiftly boarded. No signal was needed. This was an unmistakable breach of restricted waters. Procedures kicked in immediately. They referred to him as an uninvited guest. They read him his rights, informing him that he had crossed into a federally protected zone. A young serviceman stepped forward and announced in a clear voice, "Sir, this is a military restricted area. You are not permitted to be here." Jack remained silent. He did not look at them. He simply sat there, his gaze fixed on empty space as if he were listening to a rhythm inaudible to others. It was not indifference, but another layer of silence, deeper, longer, honed over years. Another officer leaned down to inspect the ropes. "They're tight," he remarked, not clear who he was addressing. The old man's gaunt wrists, veins standing out beneath wrinkled skin, bore bloody abrasions where the rope had bitten in. But he did not wince, nor did he bow his head. There was something in that stance that made a few of the sailors look at him differently. It was no longer defiance. Instead, it was acceptance. An eerie, tranquil acceptance, as though he had foreseen this moment and awaited it. As though he himself had piloted this boat to this spot, not to avoid detection, but to be found. One sailor turned to the commanding officer. "He isn't saying a word. No resistance." "No need for words," the officer replied. "We have the law." After a while, once the patrol boat had been securely moored alongside Silent Tide, the squad of sailors stepped back, leaving the old man sitting motionless as before. No further orders were given. No additional searches were conducted. They waited. It was unclear what they were waiting for, but everyone felt they stood before something that could not be reduced to a simple report. A young officer, standing behind the railing, lifted his phone to record from a distance. He intended to send it to his son. An old man risking it all in a restricted zone, he thought. But as he peered through the screen, he suddenly paused. That face, though aged and weathered, held something strangely familiar. Not like someone he had met before, but like an image seen in an old history book, on a war commemoration page, a black and white photograph slightly askew. At Jack's feet, a few drops of seawater pooled into streaks, seeping across the wooden deck. They looked like tears, yet no one dared be certain. The scene was absurdly silent. Amid tightly controlled waters, an ancient wooden boat, an old man with bound hands, and a silence that tightened the air like an invisible cord. No one spoke, yet everyone sensed. Something here was off. Not legally wrong, but wrong in feeling. As though all of this had been arranged for something no one was yet prepared to understand. Jack remained seated. The waves continued to lap gently against the hull, creating a mournful rhythm like a marching tune echoing from the past. A lone seagull appeared out of nowhere, circled once, then vanished into the mist. It seemed to understand, too, that this place guarded a secret no human could touch, except the man sitting there, unmoving beneath so many scrutinizing eyes. On the damp, chilly deck, right beside where Jack sat, rested a square, dark-hued wooden box, secured by a rusted iron padlock. Neither large nor ornately carved, the box resembled any old item an elderly person might carry, but it made the entire patrol instinctively keep their distance. Not because of its grandeur, but because of Jack's gaze upon it. Tender, yet as if guarding something no one had the right to touch. The box lay silent, yet far from invisible. It imposed an unseen weight across the mist-shrouded deck. A young officer, having just stepped up from the patrol boat, halted before it. He bent over, inspecting it as though it were mere procedure. But as his hand reached for the hinge, a hoarse voice rasped out, "Better leave it be." Jack never looked at him. The words seemed to issue from the breath of ages, low and profound, echoing like sound from the depths of a time-locked vault. The young officer froze, not out of fear, but at the finality in that warning. It was no plea or supplication, but a clear admonition. Another officer, older, seasoned, stepped forward. He sat down opposite Jack, his eyes sweeping over the box before settling on the old man's face. "What is that?" he asked. Jack turned his head. This time, his eyes were not distant, but fully present, as though at last he had decided to draw someone into the orbit of the past he had been preserving. "Just memories," he softly said. The answer made the seasoned officer frown. In his military career, he had heard every excuse, every denial, even delirious ramblings. But this reply was different. It hid nothing, concealed nothing. It was the truth, and that truth gave pause far more than any lie. Another serviceman, after a moment's observation, lowered his voice. "Could it be a surveillance device? An old signal relay?" "No antenna, no external circuitry," the commander responded. "And if it were a trap, he wouldn't be sitting next to it." Though the explanation was technical, everyone sensed that logic was not what was at work here. Something lay beyond the scope of their orders, and they all began to realize. They were standing before a piece of history, not a violation. A stronger wind swept in. The mist over the sea began to lift, revealing a vast, icy expanse of water. Jack still stared unblinkingly at the horizon. His hand curled slightly, as if to feel the ropes binding him, or to hold on to memories slipping through his fingers. The box remained there, rough, locked tight. Yet it stirred in the air something reminiscent of rusted iron and a soldier's sweat. A curious young serviceman glanced back, seeking approval, but the older officer quietly shook his head. Not now. Not with that man sitting there. After a moment, Jack suddenly spoke. 8 men. 38 days. No grave. No names. Only the sea. His words carried no subject, but no one asked for clarification. It wasn't necessary. Eyes turned toward the box as if it contained those numbers, that span of time, and the men who had vanished as though they'd never existed. An officer stepped forward. This time, he did not ask a question. He merely stood beside Jack in silence. Then, in a strangely respectful gesture, he reached out and adjusted Jack's cap, an uncommon show of deference among soldiers. The box remained unopened. Yet the atmosphere had shifted. No longer a scene of interrogation, no longer a criminal before the law. Instead, it had become a gray area between history and the present, between a man and the burdens he had carried for half a century. The sea mist lay thick like a curtain concealing something about to be revealed. On the deck of Silent Tide, no one moved. The wooden box rested silently beside Jack, like an ancient sentinel, like an unspoken vow. The air was heavy, taut as a string drawn to its breaking point. Suddenly, from the hazy horizon, a blue beam sliced through the fog. Then another, and another. Within seconds, 8 colossal silhouettes emerged from the misty ocean, each a United States Navy warship advancing in a formation so precise it sent chills down the spine. The green and white signal lights flickered through the haze, illuminating the water's surface, the weathered hull, and the bound man who had never once slumped. On the patrol boat, the silence shattered with the sound of hurried footsteps. Officers scrambled to acknowledge the incoming traffic, eyes glued to their radar screens. Whispers erupted, rapid, clipped, as if too many words might invite error. A command crackled through the internal network, an order no one had expected. Cease all intervention. Prepare to transfer authority. To whom? A sailor queried over the radio. To the Navy. Authorization code Delta 4927. It was just a string of 5 digits, but when spoken, the atmosphere shifted. It was no longer a simple investigation. It was no longer about an old man trespassing in restricted waters. It was something even the highest authorities had no right to question, only to carry out. The wooden box beside Jack emitted a soft, rhythmic clicking, like the last breath of an old machine. A soldier flinched. "Do you hear that?" he whispered. Another nodded. No one dared approach. That clicking was not the sound of a malfunction. It was steady, patterned, like an automated code being broadcast, from what they had thought was merely a keepsake box. One of the 8 warships lowered a high-speed launch. The boat sliced across the water, leaving a wake as sharp as a surgical incision. A contingent of Navy officers in ceremonial dress boarded Silent Tide in complete silence. No weapons were drawn. No orders were shouted. Only the intensity of their gazes, full of recognition, full of respect. The Navy commander stepped before Jack. He offered no formal military greeting, asked for no papers, made no inquiry into his identity. He simply inclined his head, very slightly, as though honoring an equal, or something greater. Then he turned to the Coast Guard patrol, producing a sealed, top-secret order. No one could read its contents clearly, but the heading alone was enough to render them speechless. Directive Ghost Tide. Reinstatement Protocol. The patrol boat's commanding officer pulled out his phone and called back to headquarters. After a few seconds, he returned, his expression free of doubt and authority. Only acknowledgement remained. He nodded. Control is transferred. We're standing down. On deck, the wooden box continued its steady clicking, as if counting down, or as if knocking on the door of memory. A Navy officer stooped to inspect it, then paused, placing his hand on the lid without opening it. His eyes swept over Jack, for the first time revealing gratitude. High above, seabirds began to gather, circling over the fleet. In the dim light, they looked like flickers of memories returning. The 8 warships held their positions, engines silent. Everything stood still, as though awaiting a ceremony yet to be named. Jack said nothing. He simply closed his eyes and bowed his head slightly. His face betrayed neither joy nor sorrow, only a faint relief, as though a keeper of promises had just completed the final step. Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or grab a glass of water, then stay tuned for the rest of the story's unexpected twists. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the tale, so we know you're still with us. As the Navy formation secured the waters around them, the sea grew eerily still. No sirens blared, no urgent orders echoed, only a silent but absolute presence, as if each ship knew exactly its part in a ritual never recorded in any textbook. A senior Navy officer, crisp in his impeccably pressed uniform, stepped down from the command launch and walked towards Silent Tide. He did not hurry. There was no need to. Each step felt as though it had been ordained long ago. When he reached the deck, he spoke not a word. He merely bowed, then gently unwound the ropes binding Jack's wrists. The officer's reverence was so profound that every Coast Guard sailor instinctively snapped to attention. There was no formal ceremony, no solemn music, but in that cold, silent expanse at sea, the moment carried more gravity than any official commendation. Jack remained silent, but his eyes softened, as though part of him had finally been released. He reached into his jacket pocket, a slow, seemingly innocuous gesture that nevertheless drew every gaze. He pulled out a small oilskin bundle, tightly wrapped and kept dry for decades. Unfurling it revealed a small, tarnished brass key whose head bore a wave emblem, now nearly worn away. No one spoke. As Jack inserted the key into the box's lock, everything seemed to freeze. A faint click sounded, soft, yet as unmistakable as a sealed gate being unlatched after ages. The lid sprang open. Inside lay an antiquated device, palm-sized, its metal casing scratched, its button worn smooth. A red LED flickered, then glowed steadily. The device began to emit a signal. A steady tick-tock rang out like the heartbeat of a buried past reborn. The Navy officer bent closer. His eyes widened, his lips pressed together. A ghost-tide code transmitter, he whispered, as if confirming the impossible. Jack offered no explanation. He reached back into the box and withdrew 2 more items. A scuffed leather-bound notebook, its corners frayed, pages yellowed, and a small swatch of black cloth, no larger than a hand, embroidered in silver thread with a wave symbol and a 3-pointed star. None of the younger sailors recognized the emblem, but the veterans among them fell silent. The commanding officer took the notebook and flipped it open. Inside, neat handwriting detailed dates, coordinates, and communication logs. 8 names appeared, each accompanied by the insignia of a disbanded unit. The journal contained no combat reports, only transmission records, yet it was enough to authenticate every encrypted detail of an operation once classified top secret. Meanwhile, aboard the mothership, headquarters received an encoded signal from Jack's device. On the central display, the message scrolled into view. measured and certain. Ghost tide, signal verified, protocol override, code honor. The entire Navy apparatus immediately shifted its status. A terse order came down from the highest command. Authenticate ghost tide. Activate code honor. The commanding officer turned back to Jack. There was no longer suspicion, no longer an order. Instead, he bowed his head, ever so slightly, yet completely. "He is not a criminal," he said. "He is a bearer of history." Out in the ocean, that small wooden box, along with the 3 aged artifacts, had done what the government bureaucracy had long tried to forget. It had awakened memory. But this time, no one sought to deny it. When the ghost tide signal was authenticated and the code honor activated, a profound silence enveloped the entire area. It was not the hush of suspicion or the calm before battle, but a sacred stillness, as though even the sea itself bowed its head. One by one, the warships hoisted flags at half-mast. The U.S. Navy ensign lowered in solemn tribute reserved for the fallen, or for events beyond ordinary explanation. On the deck of Silent Tide, no one spoke. Jack remained seated, but now he was neither bound nor under suspicion. He had become the focal point of an unnamed ceremony, the last witness of an operation erased from history. From the flagship's deck, a small launch was lowered. A flag officer with silver hair but steady stride boarded Silent Tide. In his hand was a navy blue leather case, recognizable to anyone who has served. Inside lay the Medal of Honor, the highest award, conferred only on those who not only served, but preserved the nation's soul through silence. The general stepped aboard, not with parade ground formality, but with the quiet steps of one visiting a comrade's grave. He stood before Jack, no longer a solitary old man, but the living embodiment of loyalty beyond time. "We forgot you, men," the general said softly, "but you never forgot them." There were no speeches, no loudspeakers, no drums, no music, only the gentle lap of waves and the wind whispering through the flags. All ships lay motionless, their engines silent. A gun salute was fired, not as an alarm, but as a tribute. Salvos boomed slowly from the 8 warships, arcing into the sky like invisible arms beckoning the souls long forgotten. Jack said nothing as he received the box containing the medal. His hand trembled slightly, not from emotion, but as if his aged body felt the symbolic weight of it. He opened the lid and gazed at the blue and gold medal, the marine's light glinting off its gleaming surface like a small star rising from the ocean's depths. No one applauded. No one needed to. The silence itself became a second medal bestowed by the sea. Every sailor aboard each warship, from officers to new recruits, stood at attention, facing Silent Tide. Many brought their hands to salute, not out of orders, but from the heart. They did not know the full story, nor understood the Ghost Tide protocol, but they all knew one thing. This was something worthy of their deepest reverence. Jack bowed for the second time that day, not as a salute in return, but to send something away. Perhaps a final greeting, perhaps an apology to those who remained behind. In that moment, he did not represent himself, but the 8 names erased from maps, reports, and the nation's memory. Yet now, at least, there was a moment in which they were named by collective silence. The wind began to shift. The half-masted flags fluttered softly, greeting a fresh breeze from the north. The sea sparkled, reflecting the young sunlight climbing higher. A few young sailors quietly removed their caps and placed hands over their hearts without being told. They had never lived in Jack's era, but in that instant, they felt they belonged to it. A female officer stepped beside Jack and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You carry more than memories. You carry the dignity the world once forgot." Jack offered no verbal reply. He only nodded silently, his eyes glistening, not with tears, but with something completed. A covenant between the living and the departed. The waves still lapped, and the sun climbed higher. In the pale light, the medal of honor shimmered like the pulse of a heart that never faltered. The ceremony ended with no fanfare. No slogans were shouted, no orders given to withdraw. Every movement unfolded in silence, a quiet born not of restraint, but from the hearts of those who had witnessed something no military manual ever taught, that some victories do not come from weapons, but from the steadfast silence of kept vows. Jack rose, moving slowly as if unwilling to awaken whatever still slumbered beneath the waves. He made his way to the bow of Silent Tide, where the wooden helm bore the worn imprint of many hands. He laid his hand on it, not to steer, but as a farewell touch. The wooden box, now empty, was returned to its place. With no lock, no device inside, he bowed over it and relocked it with the same old key. A final rite for a mission fulfilled. No one stopped him. No command barked. Only the 8 warships remained in formation behind him, not to guard, but to escort. Those massive vessels drifted gently, forming an arc around Silent Tide, like a final embrace for the sole survivor. Jack turned his face toward the rising sun. The pale golden light filtered through the mist, casting a fragile halo around his silver hair. He whispered something, so softly that no one could hear. But those standing nearby read 2 simple words on his lips. "I remember." Suddenly the seabirds took flight, spiraling upward as if to carry that final whisper far beyond these waters, beyond time itself. A young officer, standing on the 8th warship, turned to his comrade and murmured, "I don't know who he was, but I will tell this story to my son." It was no longer a military assignment. It was a tale that had to be told. 7 days later in Norfolk, the 3 artifacts once housed in that wooden box were placed inside a glass case at the Naval Museum. No bells, no special spotlights. Only a small, unadorned plaque inscribed, "Ghost Tide, 8 lives, 1 survivor, no longer silent." Visitors passed by, few pausing for long, but those who had served, who had lost comrades, who carried memories of someone who never returned. They lingered for a very long time. At a quiet corner of the sea, Silent Tide still drifted. No one knew where Jack had gone. No one ordered a search. For sometimes what a soldier needs most is not a destination, but the freedom to depart in his own way. On the ocean's waves, if you listen long enough, you may hear a whisper. Its shape is unclear. Its source is unknown. But it is undeniably real. And that is how the forgotten are remembered. Some stories require no drums or trumpets, only a gaze held long enough, a heart patient enough to listen. Today's tale is not just about an old man or a forgotten operation, but about silent loyalty, about truths that cannot be buried, and about how one person can keep a vow for over half a century. If you've watched this far, Perhaps your heart is stirring too. Hold on to this moment as a reminder. Sometimes, what matters most isn't the grandest victories, but the people who choose silence to safeguard what is right. All right, my dear viewers, if this story moved you, please leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and share it with a friend who needs to be reminded that no one is ever truly forgotten. And don't forget to comment below to let me know, where are you watching from, and what time is it there? It's always fascinating to see footprints from around the world joining us here in this story.